was almost completely empty. Thanksgiving night has a strange kind of silence to it. Most people are inside somewhere warm, surrounded by family, food, and television. Streets empty out, public places feel abandoned. And in a big city, that kind of quiet can feel unnatural, like the world is holding its breath. She sat there, bundled inside a thick jacket, coughing every few seconds, clutching the strap of her bag with numb fingers. The bowling ball at her feet felt heavier by the minute. The cold air scraped against her lungs every time she tried to breathe too deeply. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness. 1 minute. The bus would arrive in 1 minute. She refreshed the app again. 15 minutes. She sighed, exhausted, and leaned forward to look down the road for headlights. Nothing. When she straightened up again, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten slightly. The man who had gotten out of the car wasn't standing across the platform anymore. He was walking toward her, slowly, not looking around, not checking his phone, not scanning the street for buses, just walking straight toward her. Now here's the thing about situations like this. Most people don't react immediately when something feels wrong. The human brain has a strange defense mechanism. It prefers normal explanations over frightening ones. So instead of standing up and leaving, she told herself something simple. He probably just wants the bench. And technically, that's exactly what he did. He walked over and sat down, right next to her. Not across the platform, not 2 seats away, directly beside her. Close enough that she could smell the faint scent of cigarettes and something metallic, maybe cheap cologne. Her instincts flared again, too close. But she didn't say anything. She just stared down at her phone, pretending to scroll, pretending not to notice him. Minutes passed. The night air hummed with distant traffic and the buzz of a flickering overhead light. Then something happened that her brain still struggles to process even now. Without warning, she felt an arm wrap around her shoulders, not lightly, not casually, firm, possessive, like someone grabbing something that already belonged to them. For a split second, her mind went completely blank. No fear, no scream, no reaction at all, just shock. Because when something this strange happens out of nowhere, the brain sometimes refuses to believe it's real. Her first thought wasn't danger. Her first thought was confusion. Why is this happening? Who is this person? Did he mistake me for someone else? His grip tightened slightly. His hand rested against her shoulder like it had always been there. And then, in a low voice, he muttered something close to her ear. "Are you okay?" The station was almost completely empty. Thanksgiving night has a strange kind of silence to it. Most people are inside somewhere warm, surrounded by family, food, and television. Streets empty out, public places feel abandoned. And in a big city, that kind of quiet can feel unnatural, like the world is holding its breath. She sat there, bundled inside a thick jacket, coughing every few seconds, clutching the strap of her bag with numb fingers. The bowling ball at her feet felt heavier by the minute. The cold air scraped against her lungs every time she tried to breathe too deeply. Her phone screen glowed in the darkness. 1 minute. The bus would arrive in 1 minute. She refreshed the app again. 15 minutes. She sighed, exhausted, and leaned forward to look down the road for headlights. Nothing. When she straightened up again, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten slightly. The man who had gotten out of the car wasn't standing across the platform anymore. He was walking toward her, slowly, not looking around, not checking his phone, not scanning the street for buses, just walking straight toward her. Now here's the thing about situations like this. Most people don't react immediately when something feels wrong. The human brain has a strange defense mechanism. It prefers normal explanations over frightening ones. So instead of standing up and leaving, she told herself something simple. He probably just wants the bench. And technically, that's exactly what he did. He walked over and sat down, right next to her. Not across the platform, not 2 seats away, directly beside her. Close enough that she could smell the faint scent of cigarettes and something metallic, maybe cheap cologne. Her instincts flared again, too close. But she didn't say anything. She just stared down at her phone, pretending to scroll, pretending not to notice him. Minutes passed. The night air hummed with distant traffic and the buzz of a flickering overhead light. Then something happened that her brain still struggles to process even now. Without warning, she felt an arm wrap around her shoulders, not lightly, not casually, firm, possessive, like someone grabbing something that already belonged to them. For a split second, her mind went completely blank. No fear, no scream, no reaction at all, just shock. Because when something this strange happens out of nowhere, the brain sometimes refuses to believe it's real. Her first thought wasn't danger. Her first thought was confusion. Why is this happening? Who is this person? Did he mistake me for someone else? His grip tightened slightly. His hand rested against her shoulder like it had always been there. And then, in a low voice, he muttered something close to her ear. "Are you okay?" Now think about that moment carefully. A stranger wraps his arm around you in an empty bus station at night, and the first thing he asks is whether you're okay. To someone watching from far away, it might even look like concern. Like a boyfriend comforting his girlfriend. Like a friend checking on someone who looks sick. And that illusion, that thin layer of normalcy, is exactly what made the situation so dangerous. Because predators understand something most people don't. They understand how the human mind freezes when reality suddenly breaks its own rules. Her body went rigid, not fighting, not leaning into him either, just frozen in place like a statue that suddenly realized it had been touched. The words took a moment to form in her throat. "I'm fine." The sentence came out quiet, broken by a cough she couldn't hold back. She tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm just waiting for the bus." For a moment, neither of them moved. The man's arm stayed wrapped around her shoulders like a metal bar locking her into place. Then, slowly, he removed it. He sat back down beside her again, just like that, as if nothing strange had happened. And that moment, that brief release, gave her mind just enough space to start thinking again. Red flags began lighting up in her head. Why did he touch me? Why is he sitting so close? Why did that car drop him off and immediately leave? Her instinct screamed that something was wrong, But another voice inside her kept whispering the same familiar lie people tell themselves in uncomfortable situations. Maybe he was just trying to be nice. Maybe he thought you looked sick. Maybe you're overreacting. You see, the human brain hates chaos. When something terrifying happens, we instinctively try to rebuild a normal explanation, even if that explanation makes no sense. But deep down, another part of her mind had already reached a darker conclusion. She was alone. She was sick. She could barely speak without coughing, and the man sitting next to her was easily twice her size, well over 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, face partially hidden behind a bandana-style mask. And worst of all, there was no one else around. No witnesses, no security, no nearby crowd. Just the cold, empty station and the sound of wind moving through metal structures above them. Minutes passed again. The bus app refreshed. 1 minute, then 15, then 1 minute again. It felt like time itself was playing a cruel joke. But what happened next made her stomach drop, because the man stood up again. And this time, when his arm wrapped around her shoulders, his hand didn't stop there.
His hand didn't stop at her shoulder. At first it rested there again, heavy and deliberate, like before. But within seconds, his fingers began to move, slowly dragging across the thick fabric of her jacket. Up, down, across her back. The movement was subtle, almost casual, but there was nothing casual about the way it made her entire body tense. This time there was no confusion left in her mind, no rational explanation, no polite excuse she could invent for him. This man wasn't comforting her. He wasn't concerned about her coughing, and he definitely hadn't mistaken her for someone else. He was testing something, testing how much she would tolerate, testing how far he could go. And worst of all, he was doing it in a place where she knew she had almost no options. Predators are experts in environments. They don't just choose victims, they choose locations. An empty bus station, late at night, a young woman who could barely speak without coughing, a person weighed down by bags and a bowling ball. No witnesses, no escape routes that didn't involve running past him. From the outside, the situation probably looked harmless, but from where she sat, every second felt heavier than the last. Her heart started beating faster. Her mind raced through possibilities. Should she stand up? Should she walk away? Should she yell? But every option carried risk. He was bigger, stronger, and already close enough to grab her again if she moved suddenly. So she stayed still, completely still, waiting. Because sometimes survival isn't about fighting. Sometimes it's about waiting for the exact moment when escape becomes possible. And that moment appeared suddenly, in the form of 2 distant headlights. At first, they were just tiny white dots far down the street. Then they grew brighter, closer. The shape of a bus slowly emerged through the darkness. Relief flooded through her chest so quickly it almost made her dizzy. The bus, finally. But the man saw it too, and the moment the vehicle began slowing toward the station, something changed in his grip. He tightened his arm around her one last time. Then he leaned closer, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath through the fabric of his mask. And he said something quietly, words she didn't fully understand, but the tone was clear.
He wasn't leaving. He was coming with her. The bus doors hissed open. The driver barely glanced outside, and in that small, fragile window of opportunity, she slipped out from under his arm. "My bus is here," she whispered, and she stepped forward. But as she climbed onto the bus, she heard footsteps right behind her. He had followed, and suddenly what should have been safety turned into something much worse. The moment she stepped onto the bus, the air felt different. Not safe, but different. The harsh fluorescent lights inside the bus made everything feel exposed, like a stage where every movement could be seen. For a brief second, she hoped that would be enough. Public space, another human being present, a driver. But fear doesn't disappear that quickly when it's already wrapped itself around your nerves. Because the sound she heard right behind her confirmed the worst possibility. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. He had followed her onto the bus. The doors shut with a sharp mechanical hiss, sealing the quiet street outside. And just like that, the bus began to move. She didn't turn around immediately. Sometimes when danger is close, you don't want to see it. You don't want to confirm what your instincts already know. But she didn't need to look. She could feel him there, standing too close behind her. Close enough that if she stopped suddenly, she would bump directly into him. The bus was mostly empty, just a few scattered passengers further back, their faces buried in phones or staring blankly out the windows. No one was paying attention. And that's when another thought hit her. If she sat down, he would sit next to her, right beside her, close enough to trap her again. So she made a quick decision. She stayed standing, holding on to one of the metal poles near the front of the bus. It forced him into an awkward position. Because of his size, he couldn't stand comfortably in the narrow aisle right beside her without making it obvious he was crowding her. So he sat down instead, 2 seats away, but his body remained angled toward her, watching, waiting. The bus rolled through the quiet streets, passing dark storefronts and empty sidewalks. Every few seconds she coughed again, her throat raw and burning. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. She opened a message thread with a friend. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What do you even say in a moment like this? How do you explain something that still feels unreal? Finally, she typed a short message. "There's a guy following me. I think something's wrong." She hit send. Then she stared at the screen, hoping the tiny typing bubble would appear immediately. But nothing appeared. Meanwhile, across the aisle, the man hadn't moved. His eyes never left her, not once. And suddenly a horrifying thought pushed its way into her mind. What if he gets off at the same stop? Because the truth was, she couldn't go where she originally planned anymore. She couldn't lead him to her friend's apartment. She couldn't let him know where she was going. And that's when a new plan formed in her mind, a desperate one. There was one place nearby where she knew there would still be cameras, security, people who recognized her, her workplace. If she could get there first, she might actually be safe. But when the bus slowed for the next stop, her heart dropped, because the man stood up too. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop. The brakes let out a long, sharp hiss, and the vehicle lurched slightly before coming to a halt. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could feel it in her throat. This was the moment. Her plan was simple. Get off the bus, walk quickly toward the street that led to her workplace, stay in the light, stay in public, just reach the building. But the moment the bus stopped, she heard the seat behind her shift. Fabric sliding, weight moving, and then footsteps. He stood up. The sound alone was enough to send a wave of panic through her body. He was getting off too. For a split second, she considered staying on the bus, letting the doors close and riding to the next stop. But that plan collapsed immediately. If she stayed, he would stay, and she couldn't stay trapped in a moving bus with him any longer. So she stepped forward. The doors opened with a mechanical hiss. Cold night air rushed inside. She stepped down onto the sidewalk and immediately started walking, fast. Not running. Running would show fear. Running would turn it into a chase. So she walked with purpose, her bowling ball bag heavily swinging at her side. Behind her, footsteps hit the pavement. He had gotten off. Her stomach dropped. She kept walking. Street lights stretched along the road, casting long shadows across the pavement. Most of the nearby shops were already closed for the night. The city felt emptier than ever. Every sound behind her felt amplified. Footsteps, closer, steady, matching her pace. Her grip tightened around the strap of the bowling bag. She didn't turn around, not yet, but she knew he was still there, still following. Her workplace was only 2 blocks away now, just 2. The building had bright lights in the front and security cameras near the entrance. If she could just make it there, someone inside might see her. 1 block. Her breathing became heavier. Another cough ripped through her throat, forcing her to slow down for a second. And that's when the footsteps behind her suddenly sped up. Her entire body went cold. He was closing the distance, fast. Before she could react, a shadow stretched beside her on the pavement. Then a voice spoke from just behind her shoulder, low, calm, and far too close. "Why are you walking so fast?" The voice came from so close behind her that it made her flinch. "Why are you walking so fast?" Her entire body froze for a split second. That was the first time he had spoken clearly since the bus stop. His voice sounded calm, almost casual, like they were just 2 strangers walking down the same street. But there was something wrong with it, something controlled, something that made it feel like he was enjoying the situation. She didn't answer. Instead, she kept walking, faster now. The bright lights of her workplace were finally visible at the end of the block. Just a little further, just a little more. Behind her, his footsteps stayed close, too close. Then he spoke again. "Are you scared of me?" The question made her stomach twist, because the way he said it didn't sound curious. It sounded amused, like he already knew the answer. Her hands were shaking now. The bowling ball bag felt heavier with each step, pulling at her arm. But she didn't dare stop. She didn't dare turn around. The building was right there. The glass doors, the bright lights inside, security cameras above the entrance, safety. She reached the sidewalk in front of the building and grabbed the door handle quickly. The door opened. Warm air rushed out from inside. Without looking back, she stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind her. And for the first time since the night had started, she turned around. Through the glass door, she could see him standing on the sidewalk, only a few feet away, completely still.
The street light above him cast a pale glow across his face mask and dark clothing. For several seconds, he didn't move. He just stared at the door, at her. Then, slowly, he stepped closer to the glass. Her heart jumped into her throat. He leaned slightly forward, peering through the door like he was trying to memorize her face. Then he raised his hand, not to knock, not to open the door, just to point directly at her. And even through the glass, she could hear his voice faintly as he spoke one last sentence. "I'll see you again." Then he turned around and walked back into the darkness.
For a few seconds, she just stood there, frozen, her hand still gripping the door handle. Through the glass, she watched the man disappear into the darkness at the end of the street. His figure slowly faded beneath the dim streetlights until he was completely gone. But the feeling he left behind didn't disappear with him. Her legs suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline that had been holding her together all night started to wear off, and the reality of what had just happened finally hit her. She walked further inside the building, setting the bowling ball bag down on the floor. Her hands were shaking badly now. One of her coworkers noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" She tried to answer, but another coughing fit interrupted her. When it finally stopped, she explained everything. The bus stop, the man sitting next to her, the arm around her shoulders, the way he followed her onto the bus, and how he got off at the same stop just to keep following her through the empty streets. Her coworkers didn't hesitate. They locked the front door immediately and called security. Within minutes, someone checked the cameras outside the building, and sure enough, the footage showed him clearly, standing outside the door, staring inside, pointing at her before walking away. The police were contacted, and a report was filed that same night. But the scariest part of the entire story wasn't what happened at the bus stop, or on the bus, or even outside the building. It was something the police officer told her later. Situations like this happen more often than people realize. Predators look for people who are alone, people who appear sick, tired, distracted, or vulnerable. And sometimes they simply wait to see if anyone will notice what they're doing. That night could have ended very differently if the bus hadn't arrived when it did, or if she hadn't changed her plan and gone to her friend's apartment instead of her workplace. But the truth is, she still rides the bus sometimes, and every once in a while, late at night, when the station is quiet, she remembers the feeling of someone sitting too close beside her, a hand resting on her shoulder, and a voice asking a simple question in the dark. "Are you okay?" Because sometimes the scariest moments aren't loud, they're quiet, and they happen when you realize you're completely alone with the wrong person. This happened when I was 17. My family lived in a quiet house up in the mountains. It wasn't exactly isolated, but the houses were spread far apart, surrounded by trees and long, empty roads. At night, the area became extremely quiet, the kind of quiet where even a small sound outside could make you stop and listen. My parents worked long hours, and on some evenings I would end up home alone for several hours. Usually it wasn't a big deal. I'd watch TV, play games, or do homework until they got home. But one evening, something happened that made being alone feel very different. That night, my parents told me they would be home late, probably around 10 or 11 p.m.
I remember it clearly because it was already dark outside when they left. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my friend Scott. Scott lived about 10 minutes away from my house. We'd known each other for years, and sometimes he would stop by to hang out. His message said, "Hey, I'm bored. Mind if I come over for a bit?" I didn't think twice about it. I replied, "Yeah, sure, come over." He said he'd be there in about 10 minutes, so I went back to sitting in the living room, watching TV and waiting for him to show up. About 10 minutes later, I heard a car pull up outside the house. The gravel in our driveway made a very distinct sound whenever someone drove over it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I looked out the front window and saw headlights shining through the trees. Scott had arrived. At least, that's what I thought. I opened the door and called out, "Hey, Scott?" There was no answer, only the faint rustle of wind through the trees and the creaking of the old wooden porch beneath my feet. The headlights illuminated nothing but empty gravel and the long shadows of the pines. I stepped outside, squinting into the darkness. The car was still there, idling, but no one was inside. The driver's seat was empty. My stomach twisted. I thought maybe he had gone around back, or maybe it was a prank. I walked around the car, heart thudding, to check if he was hiding somewhere. Nothing. Not even the sound of footsteps on the driveway. And then I heard it, just faint enough to make me stop, a slow, deliberate knock from the back of the house. I froze. I didn't know if it was Scott or someone else or something else entirely. The knock came again, slightly louder, echoing across the empty yard. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I grabbed a flashlight from the living room table. The beam cut through the darkness, slicing long, trembling shadows across the walls of the house. I approached the back door, trying to steady my breathing. Each step felt heavier than the last. The knocking had stopped. I pressed my ear against the door, straining for any sound. Nothing. Then a whisper, so soft I could barely hear it. A single word. Inside. It wasn't Scott's voice. I knew that immediately. It was low, guttural, chilling. I froze in place, unsure whether to run, scream, or confront whatever was in my house. My mind raced. I had grown up here. I knew every creak, every shadow, every hidden corner. And yet, I didn't recognize this presence. Something had entered my home while I was alone, something I could not see, and it was waiting. I hesitated, hand trembling on the doorknob. The word inside echoed in my skull like a drumbeat of warning. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, to run into the freezing night, to escape this unknown horror. But something deeper, primal, kept me rooted. Curiosity, fear, obligation. I pushed the door open just a crack, the flashlight slicing a narrow line of light into the darkness. The hallway stretched before me, longer than I remembered, shadows pooling into corners like liquid black. And then I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly thin, standing at the far end of the hall. It wasn't moving at first, just waiting. The outline was human enough, but wrong. Its limbs were elongated, too long to be natural, its head tilted at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. No face was visible, only the void where eyes should have been, empty sockets reflecting nothing but darkness. The air turned cold, sharp, cutting through my lungs like icy knives. I could feel its attention on me, and somehow it knew. It knew I was awake, it knew I was alone, and it was savoring it. My legs refused to move. My voice had left me entirely. Even the beam of the flashlight seemed weak, trembling against its form, as if light itself feared to touch it. Then, slowly, it moved. A step forward, soundless, impossible. Another. The floorboards didn't creak. The shadow inched closer, filling the hall with a darkness that felt alive, pressing in on me, suffocating. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to breathe, but my chest locked in panic. The creature, or whatever it was, paused, and then I heard it, whispering again, words not meant for ears, but for something deeper, something buried in the mind. You shouldn't be here. I wanted to run, to flee, but the hall seemed to extend infinitely ahead. Every step forward it took, the distance between us shrank impossibly fast. And then I realized it wasn't bound by the rules of the house. It could be anywhere, everywhere, watching from shadows, waiting in corners, lying in the dark, patient. I stumbled backward, flashlight clattering to the floor. The beam rolled across the walls, across old family portraits that now looked sinister, faces twisted in shadows I had never noticed before. And as I crouched there, heart hammering, I understood something horrifying. This was no intruder. This was the house itself, or something older, darker, waiting for the moment I would let my guard down. And tonight, I had already lost.
I could hear it breathing now, though nothing visible moved. A cold, wet sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves, seeping into my ears, crawling into my skull. I backed into the nearest wall, heart hammering like a drumbeat of panic, knowing rational thought had left me entirely. Then I saw it, its movement, subtle at first. A shadow stretching across the floor, like ink bleeding across wood, pulsating with intent. It wasn't walking, it was gliding, impossibly fast, yet silent, following my every thought. The closer it got, the heavier the air became, thick with a metallic scent, the tang of old blood. I realized I couldn't see the floor beneath it, couldn't see where its legs began or ended. It was wrong, and yet undeniably alive. I tried to crawl backward, but the hall seemed endless, walls stretching further as I moved. My flashlight flickered, and for a second I glimpsed what it truly was, a silhouette of Scott, but twisted, distorted, elongated, his eyes hollow, his mouth open in a scream that wasn't his. It was him, and it wasn't him. I screamed then, a sound ripped from my soul, and the shadow lunged, not at me, but through me. I felt its touch on my shoulder, but it wasn't cold, it burned, fire beneath the ice, a pressure that pressed my chest inward, bending reality itself. I wanted to fall, to collapse, but my body refused. It whispered again, words that weren't spoken, vibrating directly inside my mind. You see me now. You are mine.
And in that instant, the hall changed. Walls melted into darkness, ceiling vanished, the house itself became fluid, breathing around me, alive, conscious, hungry. Time didn't move forward, it spiraled. Past and present collided, and I was trapped between the moments when Scott was still human and when he became that. A door slammed somewhere behind me. Footsteps, or something pretending to be footsteps, circled, never landing, always out of sync with my perception. I realized then I wasn't alone, not in this house, not ever again. And the thing that Scott had become, it wanted me to understand, to see, to know what waits when isolation stretches beyond comprehension, when the familiar twists into nightmare. I felt a pull, a slow, inexorable drag toward the end of the hallway, toward the darkness that had swallowed Scott's form. I fought, clawed at the floorboards, cursed the cold, the snow outside, anything, but the pull was relentless. It whispered one final thing before I lost all control. All doors lead here. You will see what I have seen. And then I was gone, not in body, not fully awake, not asleep, but in that liminal space where horror waits, where consciousness frays and reality bends, where the story is no longer yours, but something else's.
I woke, or I thought I woke, but the world was wrong. The walls were no longer wood, no longer familiar. Shadows bled across surfaces that shouldn't exist, twisting angles and corners into geometries that made my eyes protest. The air itself carried whispers, not voices, but intentions, like 1,000 unseen mouths chewing at my thoughts. I stumbled forward, each step hollow, as though the floor resisted me, each plank of wood a living thing, shifting beneath my weight. Then I saw it, a mirror or a reflection, but not mine. In it, my face stared back, pale, eyes wide, but something beneath the skin flickered. A darkness moving independently, reaching from my chest toward the mirror's edge, spilling across the surface. I blinked. It was gone. Or was it? A slow, deliberate tapping started behind me, echoing off walls that seemed impossibly far apart. I turned. Nothing. Then again. Faster this time. I realized it was my heartbeat, but not mine alone. Something else's rhythm synced with mine, an invisible predator matching pulse to pulse, waiting, anticipating. And then I understood. I wasn't alone in my mind. Scott wasn't Scott, not anymore. And whatever had claimed him, it had already started on me. I ran, hallways twisted impossibly, doors leading to rooms that defied logic, a staircase folded over itself. Windows looked out to skies I had never seen, black with no stars, yet I could feel eyes watching from the void. The whispers intensified, now coherent, a language I knew but never learned, filling my skull with memory fragments that weren't mine, visions of ancient corridors, of rituals long buried beneath the earth, sacrifices that called for more than blood, but attention, obedience, surrender. Every step I took brought me closer to understanding the pattern, the rhythm of control. The house was not haunted. It was a machine, a living archive of corrupted consciousness, feeding, learning, and shaping those who entered. I realized something else, and it chilled me deeper than the freezing wind outside. There had never been an invitation. There had only been a lure.
Scott reached out not to reconnect, but to deliver me to the threshold of something older than reason, older than fear. And now, trapped, I could feel it pressing against the edges of my perception, trying to teach me its secret. Its lesson was simple. Truth is dangerous, and those who seek it are never free. I shouted, but the sound was swallowed instantly, my voice feeding into the hungry architecture. I collapsed, and the floor became sky, the walls became river, and I realized the final horror. The house had no end, no exterior, no escape. Only the lesson and the watching and the inevitability. If you're seeing this now, understand, some stories are not meant to be told. Some truths are not meant to be known. And yet, you've already crossed the line. Before we descend further, I want you to anchor yourself. Comment the phrase, "I see the shadow," below. Then comment it again, twice. This is more than ritual. It locks in your presence, your recognition that you are witnessing truths the world tries to hide. Do it now and feel the shift.
The morning, or what I thought was morning, arrived with no sun. Light existed, but it had weight, pressing down on my chest like a living thing. Every breath I took tasted of iron and ash. I tried to move, to flee, to wake into reality, but my body had become a cage. My hands felt foreign, my limbs like they belonged to someone or something else. And then I saw him, Scott, or what remained of him. He stood across the warped room, motionless, his head tilted just slightly, observing. His eyes, they weren't his, not entirely. Dark void swirled where life should have been, and yet behind them flickered a cunning, calculating awareness. He had become both messenger and prison, the human shell now a conduit for something far older, far crueler. "Do you see it?" His voice was low, guttural, a layering of tones that shouldn't coexist in one mouth. Yet it was familiar. My own fear reverberated in his timbre. I could not answer. Words failed. The moment I tried, my thoughts fragmented. Memories that were mine and memories that were not merged violently, overlapping like static on a corrupted signal. I saw flashes, rituals in stone chambers, robed figures chanting over hollowed graves, children with eyes wide and empty, and then myself, moving through corridors I didn't recognize. And then he, or it, spoke again. "You have been chosen. Witnessing is only the beginning. Obedience is optional, but knowledge comes at a cost." The house itself responded. Walls flexed like flesh, floors shuddered, doors opened into nothingness, and yet each path called me, tempting me toward a revelation I instinctively knew I would regret. I understood in a sudden shattering clarity that this was the design: disorientation, fear, and surrender. The longer I stayed, the more my mind dissolved into the rhythm of the house, into the will that had reshaped Scott. I remembered the whispers from the previous night, now more insistent, forming words in a language older than civilization. Yield, watch, become. My instinct screamed to flee, but my body was no longer my own.
I was tethered to this place by invisible chains, each thought feeding a consciousness that existed beyond life and death, feeding on hesitation, on fear, on recognition. I realized the final horror. Scott had not disappeared. He had been consumed, restructured, and sent back as a vessel. And now I was next. The house didn't want me dead. It wanted me transformed. And worse, I could feel it already. My thoughts weren't private. My reasoning flickered. My memories were thin like paper in a storm. Something ancient, patient, and insatiable was teaching me, bending me, reshaping me in silence. This is the point where many fail, and the real terror begins. When the human mind first recognizes that reality is neither stable nor safe, when the familiar becomes a cage for the impossible, you learn that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. The descent has begun.
I stumbled down the hallway, each step resonating like a drum in a cathedral built for dread. The darkness wasn't simple absence of light. It had texture, almost tactile, and it pulled at my skin like sticky silk meant to tether me in place. I thought I was running, but my legs moved slower than thought, my body heavier than reason. At the end of the hallway, where the guest room had swallowed Scott before, the shadows shifted. Shapes emerged and recoiled in impossible ways. One moment a man, the next a distorted mirror of me, pale and trembling, with eyes hollow and accusing. I wanted to look away, but something deep in my mind forced my gaze, demanding recognition. Recognition of what? I didn't yet know. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, no longer fragmented sounds, but words, phrases, commands in layered tones. My ears could not parse them logically, yet I understood. See what is hidden, feel what is denied, understand what cannot be named. Each syllable burned against my mind, leaving marks, etching truths I didn't wish to bear. The air shifted, a chill crawled up my spine and down my arms, as if the house itself was inhaling, preparing to exhale something malevolent. I saw the walls pulse, veins of darkness rippling like living ink, following some rhythm I did not know, yet instinctively feared. The longer I stayed, the more I realized this house was a predator, and I was prey that had wandered too close to its maw. Scott's figure appeared again, half in shadow, half in that strange, unrecognizable light. His head cocked to the side, and I swear he smiled, but the smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing, like the shell of a man animated by intelligence that had no morality, no empathy. It watched me not with curiosity, but with calculation, measuring how long it would take for me to break, for my mind to fracture in the ways it had fractured his. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed. I wanted to run, but the hallway stretched, walls bending inward, narrowing, expanding, rewriting themselves with every step. Panic clawed at me, but beneath that panic was something worse, a creeping comprehension that whatever had claimed Scott was patient, eternally patient. It wasn't bound by night or day, by winter or snowstorm. Time was meaningless here. A voice echoed, this time in my own thoughts, not spoken aloud, not even heard in any conventional sense. It was inside.
Those who resist suffer. Those who witness endure. Those who accept transcend. And then, as my body and mind screamed, I realized the true depth of my peril. I wasn't just inside a haunted house. I was inside an experiment, a crucible designed to rewrite me, to strip away the familiar layers of self and feed me into something older, something infinite. I wanted to turn back. I wanted the snow outside, the drive down the mountain, the normalcy of my own room, but I knew, deep down, that stepping back was an illusion. The house, or whatever animated Scott's shell, had already begun. I had crossed the threshold, and now I was in the long, unending shadow of what awaited.
I finally forced myself off the couch, every step toward the hallway feeling like wading through a thick, invisible fog. The shadows shifted as I moved, stretching, curling, almost watching me with sentience. And then I saw it, or him, I couldn't tell, a figure standing silently just inside the first guest room. Not Scott, not fully human, yet not entirely something else. Its presence exuded a cold, calculating awareness, the kind that studies its prey before making a decision. My breath caught, my legs trembled, but I couldn't turn away. I reached the room, but the figure vanished the moment I stepped inside. The room was empty, yet the metallic, biting scent lingered, the residual weight of something inhuman. That's when I understood. The house wasn't just a place, it was a predator, and Scott, whatever he had become, its willing host, or perhaps a prisoner of it. The realization slammed into me like ice water. For years, this presence had remained hidden, dormant, feeding on the old wood, the isolation, the very loneliness of the mountains, waiting for someone curious, someone foolish to wander in. And now it had me. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag, ignoring every instinct to look back. The snowstorm roared, and the cold was a relief as I threw myself into the car, the headlights slicing through the white chaos outside. But even as I drove, faster than I thought possible on the icy roads, I felt it watching. From the rear-view mirror, the dark silhouette of Scott's house loomed through the snow, windows like empty eyes. And in one of them, I could swear I saw a shadow shift, a figure at the end of the hallway, just beyond the glass, still waiting. I never saw Scott again. I sent messages, calls, nothing. Weeks later, the number went silent. Friends shrugged, thinking he had just vanished into the mountains, like so many do. But I know the truth. That house, that presence, it didn't just change Scott, it consumed him. It lingered, waiting, patient, knowing that the next curious soul would eventually come, and it would be ready. Some truths are buried for a reason. Some doors should never be opened, and some shadows are older than any story you think you know. I left the mountains that night forever changed, carrying with me the weight of seeing what should not exist, feeling what should not be felt.